Hello folks, hope you're having a great day today. Today I'm going to turn to the fifth of the stories that are in my sort of H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu Mythos October that I'm doing, where I'm doing an accelerated pace where I'm doing a story for you every other day. Today I'm going to take a look at the color out of space. I think color out of space is a great way to do my fifth story in this. By now we've done four stories with H.P. Lovecraft that have basically looked at the Cthulhu Mythos that he created with the Call of Cthulhu, which he wrote in the late 20s. And the Call of Cthulhu is basically him reaching his final point as a writer, and basically his now mastering sort of his own styles as a writer and so forth. And for the last 10 years of his career, the things I think he's writing are much better, much higher quality, much more consistent, and so forth, than some of his earlier works, which I think are much less consistent, and so forth. And I also think that he is, in addition to now hitting, I think, most of his shots on the first shot, he's also now writing about cosmic horror, cosmic indifference, much bigger level stuff. And he pushes horror past where it was before, or where it was in this sort of daily grind. I'm trying to escape somebody trying to kill me, like Jack the Ripper, or a similar character, or trying to get away from a ghost, or trying to figure out how to stop myself from being haunted by one, or me and my friends trying to kill some vampires in London, or something like that. I mean, it's those sort of low-level survival kind of concepts. Whereas here, it's very different. Here, the entire world is out to get you, and the entire universe does not care about you at all. There's nobody out there to save you. There's nobody out there to help you. You are tiny little things that mean nothing. And the only reason that you haven't been taken out yet is because you just don't have any value to anybody. It's just not even worth the effort, and so forth. And the more you learn about how bad this place is, the more likely you are to go mad. And we should just all go. It is better for us to go run back into a dark age and live in safety without knowing anything than it would be for us to find more and more and more stuff about what's actually happening in the world around us. That's the world that he creates. This giant, that so many things are happening at a giant mythic level, and so forth. And that's the Cthulhu Mythos. And he has these various people and gods and so forth, all the way that are kind of like Cthulhu, although gods isn't probably the appropriate term. He never uses that word himself. But you get the idea. This big giant mythic creatures, elements and so forth that are giant, that are having all the way down to little tiny parts. He'll create little places like Arkham, Miskatonic University, and so forth. Books like Necronomicon and so forth that are going to be these common elements in this common shared world that lots of people are going to write. So what I want to do now, though, is do something a little different for you. And we're going to take a look at the color out of space. I really like the color out of space. It's one of my favorite stories ever. It's just so well written. It's one of my favorite mythos stories that Lovecraft wrote. It's also one of my favorite Lovecraft stories outside the mythos that he wrote either. It's also just one of my favorite stories that somebody wrote too. It's just incredibly good. I think it's him firing on all cylinders. And I think it's also great. It's near the beginning of the Cthulhu Mythos. And so let's take a look at it, and then we'll talk a little bit about why I love the story so much and why I think it's important to do this early in this conversation too, because I think it's just such a different story than you will expect from the mythos and so forth, and why. So let's take a look at it. Basically what's going to happen is very simple. You're going to have basically this cosmic comet or meteor or asteroid is going to fall from space. It's going to be seen by a number of local scientists and so forth that are going to see it. It's going to fall down into a quiet little New England town, and then basically what's going to happen, little farming area that's way up in the hills and so forth, and it's away from anything major. It's going to be followed and so forth. There's going to be seem some weird, unusual light and some other things as being observed and so forth. But then it falls to the earth, and basically you're going to have an investigation is going to be set up by a local person from a local institution and so forth. A couple of small minor newspaper articles are going to hit. They're going to head on up there and so forth. And basically what they're going to find out is there's this farm out there, and they're going to check in on the person that's there. Him and his wife and a couple of kids are there too, and they're just trying to track it down and so forth. It fell down near the well, and so forth, so they're going to be tracking it down. There was these unusual colors and so forth. Some time passes. It looks like the farm has started to turn a little gray. A lot of its crops and its creatures are starting to turn little tinges of gray, or just to die out altogether and start to decay pretty quickly, and so forth. So it's basically kind of fighting against this sort of decayingness that's happening on the farm in the surrounding area much more strongly than before, and so forth. And then what's going to end up happening is that as more time is invested, more investigations being done by this researcher, They're going to find out that some of the things aren't being told that overnight. Trees are moving when they're not supposed to be doing. Things are glowing when they're not supposed to be glowing. They're glowing odd colors when they're not supposed to be. They're dying much more quickly than they should, and then they're decaying after they die much more quickly than they should too, and so forth. Eventually, the two kids are going to be missing. He's going to show back up. The farmer is going to be dies right in front of him, and so forth. And the same things are going to be seen again and again and again. And basically, the entire area is going to erupt in all these giant colors from space that are not colors that exist on Earth, and those are incredibly unusual. And that's basically going to be the story. And that's it. All right, now that's it. End of the story. I'm not going to give you much. It's about a 40-page short story, and so forth. And so I'm not going to spend too much of your time with it, with a synopsis of it. Go check it out. The reason why I like it, it was not published in Weird Tales or anything like that. It was actually published in a science fiction magazine. One of the best ones. It was the one that Hugo, the Hugo Awards were named after, that he wrote at that time, and so forth. And he is actually heavily anthologized in the science fiction trades early on. It has only the lightest of Cthulhu Mythos stories elements in it. They're barely there at all. And so if you had never heard of the Cthulhu Mythos and you just go and read it, it'll just be a science fiction story. It'll be basically a science fiction horror story. You won't even see Cthulhu Mythos. And it's incredibly strong for that reason. It's a science fiction story first. It's about something that fell to the sky from above, like a meteor or something, that had these weird lights that had never been seen on Earth before, with these weird colors, and so forth, that has a big alien influence in this farm and in the surrounding area, but are still there to this day, the day that is being written by the story person. That's incredibly strong. It's incredibly good world building and so forth. I also think that the plot is not what makes this story so good. It's the setting. It's the characters. It's the things. Because the plot's just, hey, something fell from space, let's go explore and find out what happened. I mean, you can put that in like a single sentence and move on. Next story. But what makes it really strong is that it's so well designed. It's so well choreographed. All of the various descriptions for it are so strong. And I think that Lovecraft loved Algernon Blackwood. And Algernon Blackwood was, I think, probably the strongest master of combining this kind of concept, both this awesomeness and wonder, with a sense of horror and, oh my God, this is happening. And in every sort of paragraph, and almost sometimes in the same sentence, Algernon Blackwood as a writer was somebody who could twin both of these, and Lovecraft loved to do that, and to try to do that. And I think that this story is one of the best places where he does it. And so this idea, this wonderful thing that happened, it fell from the sky, but it's also dark and twisted and killing people, is something that he does very, very well. And I think that this is one of his best places that he does it. I also think The Night Ocean, which is one of the final stories that he does, it's sort of co-written with one of his people, and I've already reviewed that one for you actually, is also another great example of this too, where you have that really strong sense of both. But this one is, I think, just so well done, and it's such like Cthulhu Mythos elements. And it's basically a science fiction story. So that's one of the reasons why I like it to be the fifth story, because the first four stories have been so heavy in the mythos. Call of Cthulhu, Shadow, At the Mountains, and Dunwich Warp, that we've already done for you, are so heavy with Cthulhu Mythos elements and pushing the Cthulhu Mythos and making it. And this one is just barely there, and that's why it's so good. It's because he uses the Cthulhu Mythos here as some ways of adding flavoring, and it's basically salt that helps to make the meal work. There's not much of it there. It doesn't need to be there, as opposed to the Dunwich War, which has tons of Cthulhu Mythos stuff happening, and many new additions. At the Mountains of Madness, this with the star creatures and so forth. The Cthulhu Mythos, of course, we introduced Cthulhu and a lot of these other things. All these sorts of previous stories that we've read have a lot of it, but this one doesn't, and that's what I like about it so much. It just uses it just as a tiny little sprinkling to give the whole story flavor and make it come together. But the story is, even if you came to it without having read the Cthulhu Mythos, knowing what or so forth, just as a science fiction story, in a science fiction trade, in science fiction collections, and so forth, as just a fan of science fiction, this story is incredibly strong on its own. And that's why I like it so much. And I think it's good to have this as the fifth story as we begin to kind of move more fully into Cthulhu Mythos. I do think it's nice to have this. Most Cthulhu Mythos stories are not that are being written by modern writers or writers in later generations, are not being written from a color out of space sort of style of writing, which I think is unfortunate, because I think it's probably a missed opportunity. And so forth. I've already talked about this before in a previous video, so I'll give it to you now. I consider basically the people who are writing the Cthulhu Mythos at the time of Lovecraft is Generation 1. August Derleth has some of his early stuff in this. Frank Belknap Blanc, Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith. A lot of these people who are writing in the Cthulhu Mythos and sharing each other's stories and story elements are, I think, Generation 1. I think Generation 1 stuff is very avant-garde. And then Generation 2 is like the next 20 years or so. It's basically led by August Derleth. We'll talk about that more when August Derleth is my main stories and features pieces and so forth. But I talk about Generation 2 in my previous video. Generation 3 was the next 20 years. I'll probably ended around 1980 or so forth. And we're in Generation 4 now that's had... and Generation 3 is probably led by Lynn Carter. And some other people too, and then, but I'd consider Lynn Carter to be sort of the major voice of Generation 3, like much like August Derleth was the major voice of Generation 2, and then Generation 4 we're living in, had been for the past 30 years or so. It's been much more avant-garde stuff, much more back to basics, much more new stuff that's happening, and new genres that are being sort of embraced as a part of this sort of Cthulhu mythos, and so forth. But the stuff that followed, the stuff that was being written by Derleth, Ramsey Campbell, and Lynn Carter, their stories did not tend to follow, unfortunately, the Colorado space, which is sad because I think this is such a well-written story and so good at showing how light your Cthulhu Mythos needs to be in order to be still good, and so forth. So I think that was also the science fiction with stuff happening that's very new and very different. This sort of key idea of being a different color, a color that nobody's seen before, that's from outer space. I really like that idea too. It just resonates with me too as a reader. So anyway, I'll end my review there. I'll just leave it there. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you read it, I'm happy to engage you with it further. If there's anything you disagree with or agree with, I'm happy to talk about with you. If you agree with me that it was resonant, or if you disagree with me, you don't think it's as strongly written as I do, happy to talk with you about that more in the comments below. And if you like this, feel free to hit that subscribe button because there are going to be so many more videos, reviews, and so forth like this to follow. I definitely am really passionate about older works that are in science fiction, fantasy, and horror that we may have either forgotten about or never heard about, that are classics and really help to kind of sculpt us and so forth. So there's going to be a whole lot more of this stuff to follow. And finally, hey, if you watch this video all the way to the end, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. We all have busy days, and we all have busy lives. So this is back to you this time with me. This is something I really appreciate. Thanks again.